I never thought I'd be the kind of person to keep a secret like this, least of all from my husband. But as I stood in the barn that evening, my hands trembling and my heart racing, I knew there was no going back. The old wooden beams creaked above me, and the familiar scent of hay mixed with the faint musk of leather saddles. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Not anymore. It started innocently enough, a small choice here, a harmless decision there. But before I knew it, I was in too deep, tangled in something I couldn't explain and didn't fully understand. And now, staring into the wide, knowing eyes of our horse Luna, I felt as though she could see straight through me. Could she sense the betrayal? Or was I just projecting my own guilt onto her? Either way, one thing was certain. This was a moment that would change everything. I'm Jessica, a 35-year-old woman who once believed life could be neatly divided into good and bad decisions. I had always prided myself on being loyal, dependable, and unshakably honest. My husband, Mark, is a steady force in my life, practical to a fault, hardworking, and the kind of man who'd rather show his love by fixing the leaking roof than with grand romantic gestures. We've been married for 10 years, and though the spark has dulled over time, we've built a quiet life together on our small ranch in Montana. Luna, our horse, was my idea. I'd begged for her when we first moved out here, a compromise for leaving the bustle of city life behind. She was a fiery bay mare with a streak of independence, and over time, we formed a bond unlike anything I'd experienced. She wasn't just a horse to me. She was a confidant, a presence that seemed to understand the unspoken parts of my life. Mark loved her in his own way, taking care of the logistics like feed and vet appointments, but he never shared the same connection I did. Maybe that's why, when he started traveling more for work, I found myself spending longer hours in the barn. It became my sanctuary. The scent of fresh hay, the rhythmic sounds of Luna's breathing, the way the late afternoon sun filtered through the wooden slats. It all felt like a world apart from the mounting loneliness in my marriage. Mark's new consulting gig took him out of town for weeks at a time. At first, I missed him terribly. I'd call every night, eager to share the mundane details of my day, but his replies became shorter, his tone distracted. "I'm swamped," he'd say, or "we'll catch up when I'm home." Eventually, I stopped trying so hard. That's when Ryan showed up. He was our neighbor's nephew, hired to help with the ranch chores while my husband was away. Tall, with sun-kissed skin and a lopsided grin that hinted at mischief, Ryan was everything Mark wasn't: carefree, adventurous, and just a little dangerous. He had a way of making you feel like the only person in the room, even if that room was a dusty barn. I told myself it was harmless at first, the way I'd linger a little longer when he came by to help with Luna. He'd tell stories about his travels, his laughter filling the quiet spaces of my day. But deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. Looking back, the warning signs were all there. The way my heart skipped when he'd brush past me, the way I found excuses to be in the barn when I knew he'd be around. But I ignored them, or maybe I didn't want to see them. After all, what harm could a little company do? Little did I know, the lines I thought I'd never cross were closer than I imagined. It started with the rides. "Luna could use more exercise," Ryan said one afternoon, leaning casually against the barn door. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms dusted with dirt from the day's work. I glanced at Luna, who stood lazily swishing her tail, and then back at him. "You're not wrong," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "I could take her out for a run," he offered. His grin was easy, but his eyes held something more, a challenge, a spark. "No need," I said quickly, pulling Luna's reins off the hook. "I'll do it myself." But Ryan didn't leave. Instead, he saddled up a horse from the neighboring property and joined me. At first, our rides were uneventful, just two people sharing a trail. He talked about growing up in Colorado, his love of horses, and his restless nature that kept him moving from one ranch to the next. I listened, occasionally chiming in with stories of my own life, careful not to say too much, but enough to keep the conversation flowing. Over time, the silences between us grew comfortable. Too comfortable. I'd catch myself looking at him out of the corner of my eye, admiring the way he moved with ease, as though he belonged to the wildness around us. I started laughing more than I had in years, a sound that felt strange and new to me. Then one evening, everything shifted. We had returned from a ride just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I dismounted Luna and patted her neck, grateful for the distraction of tending to her. Ryan was silent for a moment, watching me as I worked. "You're different when he's not around," he said softly. I froze, my hand still on Luna's flank. "What do you mean?" "You're freer. Happier." His voice was steady, but his words cut through me like a blade. "That's ridiculous," I said, forcing a laugh. "Mark and I are fine." "Are you?" he asked, stepping closer. The barn suddenly felt too small, the air thick and charged. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I busied myself with unbuckling Luna's saddle, my hands trembling as his presence loomed behind me. "You deserve to feel alive, Jessica," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I spun around, ready to tell him to stop, to leave, to remind him, and myself, that this was crossing a line. But the words caught in my throat when I met his gaze. There was no mockery, no smugness, just an earnest intensity that made my heart ache. "Ryan, this isn't right," I managed, my voice cracking. "I know," he said, stepping back. "I'm not trying to make you do anything. But you can't tell me you don't feel it too." I watched him walk away, his boots crunching against the dirt floor, and felt a pang of something I couldn't name. Regret, relief, longing. That night I lay awake in bed, replaying his words over and over. "You deserve to feel alive." When was the last time I'd felt that? Mark called the next morning, his voice brisk and businesslike. "How's everything going?" he asked. "Fine," I said, forcing cheerfulness into my tone. "Luna's been getting plenty of exercise. The ranch is running smoothly." "Good," he replied. "I'll be home in a week. We'll catch up then." The call ended as abruptly as it began, leaving me staring at the phone, a hollow ache in my chest. Over the next few days, I avoided Ryan as much as possible, but it was futile. He was always around, helping with repairs, feeding the animals, offering a friendly smile that sent my emotions spiraling. One evening, as I was brushing Luna, he appeared in the barn doorway. I stiffened, my heart pounding. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. He stepped closer, his expression serious. "Look, I didn't mean to complicate things, but I can't pretend I don't care about you. You don't even know me," I said, my voice barely audible. "I know enough," he replied. "Enough to see that you're not happy. Enough to see how much you're holding back." Tears welled in my eyes, and I hated myself for it. "It doesn't matter," I said. "Mark is my husband. Whatever this is, it can't happen." Ryan nodded, his jaw tight. "I get it, but you can't lie to yourself forever, Jess." As he walked away, I felt the weight of his words settle over me like a storm cloud. I had spent years convincing myself that my life was enough, that my marriage was enough. But now, for the first time, I wasn't so sure. Mark came home the following week, and everything seemed normal, or at least I tried to pretend it was. I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his work, and avoided any mention of Ryan. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he sensed something was off. Late one evening after dinner, Mark sat across from me at the kitchen table. His eyes were tired, but his voice was steady when he said, "Jess, is there something you need to tell me?" I froze, my fork hovering over my plate. "What do you mean?" "You've been different lately," he said, leaning forward. "Distracted, distant. Is there someone else?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. My first instinct was to deny it, to reassure him, to sweep everything under the rug. But the weight of my guilt was suffocating, and I knew I couldn't keep lying, not to him and not to myself. "There's no one else," I said carefully, my voice shaking.
"But
I think I've been lonely, and it's made me question things." Mark's face hardened, his jaw tightening. "Question things? What does that mean?" I swallowed hard, tears brimming in my eyes. I don't know, I admitted. You're gone so much, and when you're here, it feels like we're just going through the motions. I've been spending a lot of time with Luna, and with Ryan. At the mention of Ryan's name, Mark's expression darkened. Ryan? The ranch hand? Nothing happened, I said quickly, desperation creeping into my voice. But he made me realize how much I've been missing. How much I've been craving connection. Mark stood abruptly, pacing the room. So what? I'm not enough for you anymore. It's not about that, I cried. It's not about you not being enough. It's about us. We've been living like strangers, Mark. You bury yourself in work, and I'm here alone, trying to keep everything together. He stopped and looked at me, his face a mixture of anger and pain. You should have told me. Instead, you let some ranch hand fill the gap. It wasn't like that, I said, my voice breaking. Ryan was just a mirror. He showed me what I was missing, what I'd buried for the sake of keeping this life going. Mark sank into a chair, his head in his hands. The silence between us was deafening, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, he looked up, his eyes filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. Do you still love me, Jess? He asked quietly. The question shattered me. Did I love him? Of course I did, but love felt so distant, buried under years of routine and unspoken resentments. I don't know, I whispered. I think I do, but I don't know if it's enough anymore. Mark's face crumpled, and for the first time in our marriage I saw him cry. It was a raw, heartbreaking sound, and it made me realize just how much we'd both been holding back. I thought I was doing everything right, he said through his tears. Working hard, providing for us, building this life. I didn't see how much I was losing you in the process. And I didn't tell you, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. I let the silence grow between us because I was scared of what it would mean to speak up. For a long time, we sat there in the dim light of the kitchen. The truth of our brokenness laid bare. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. Just two people trying to make sense of the wreckage. Finally, Mark reached across the table and took my hand. I want to fight for us, he said. If you're willing to fight too. I nodded, though the path ahead felt uncertain and steep. I want to try. It wasn't a resolution, not really, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The days that followed were quiet but heavy with meaning. Mark and I didn't suddenly become the couple we used to be, but we talked more. For the first time in years, we faced the truths we had avoided for so long. How we'd both let the space between us grow, how we'd chosen silence over vulnerability. Ryan left the ranch shortly after our conversation. He didn't say goodbye, and I didn't seek him out. It was better that way, cleaner. But his words lingered, echoing in my mind during those solitary moments in the barn or late at night when sleep eluded me. Mark and I began to rebuild slowly. We started spending evenings together, not just in front of the TV but talking, sharing parts of ourselves we'd forgotten to nurture. It was awkward at first, like learning the steps to a dance you once knew by heart but had long since abandoned. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping moments of forgiveness. Just small gestures, a shared laugh, a touch on the arm, a glance that said more than words ever could. It was fragile, this new version of us, but it was real. One evening, as I brushed Luna in the barn, Mark joined me. He stood beside me, running a hand along her flank. She's a good horse, he said, his voice warm. She is, I replied, smiling softly. He hesitated before continuing. I know I haven't always been there for you the way I should have. But I'm here now, and I want to be better. Tears welled in my eyes. But this time, they were different, lighter, hopeful. Me too, I said. As we stood there in the quiet barn, I realized that love isn't about perfection or never faltering. It's about the willingness to pick up the pieces and try again, even when it's hard, even when you're scared. Looking back, I know I'll always carry the weight of that summer, the choices I made and the pain they caused. But I also carry the lessons, the importance of connection, of honesty, of fighting for what matters. Life is messy, complicated, and sometimes unbearably painful. But it's also beautiful in its ability to heal and transform. And for that I am grateful.